Why is Keanu Reeves so loved, not just by fans, but by everyone who meets him? In an industry dominated by egos, luxury, and the never-ending chase for relevance, Keanu Reeves stands out as a man who seems almost allergic to the fame he's earned. He's not the loudest, not the flashiest. He rarely does interviews, avoids drama, and somehow manages to stay grounded after decades in the spotlight. So how did this quiet, introspective actor become a symbol of both cinematic badassery and unshakable kindness? And why do so many people feel a deep emotional connection to someone they've never even met? To understand Keanu Reeves, the man, not the myth, we need to go all the way back to the beginning. Keanu was born in Beirut, Lebanon in 1964 to an English mother and a Hawaiian Chinese father. But by age 3, his father had walked out. That would be the beginning of a life filled with transience, uncertainty, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. He moved around constantly, first to Sydney, then New York, and finally Toronto. His mother remarried several times, and Keanu found himself with a series of stepfathers, none of whom stayed long. The constant relocation and family instability made it hard to form lasting relationships or feel truly safe anywhere. School wasn't much better. Keanu struggled with dyslexia, and traditional learning environments didn't suit him. He was often labeled a troublemaker, not because he was malicious, but because he was bored, restless, and misunderstood. He dropped out of high school before graduating, but there was one thing that consistently lit him up: storytelling, acting. In theater classes, he came alive. And while the world tried to fit him into a mold he didn't belong in, the stage gave him the freedom to express all the emotions he otherwise buried deep. Keanu's rise wasn't the typical Hollywood rocket ship launch. It was more like a quiet burn, steady, deliberate, and fueled by roles that didn't just showcase his versatility, but tapped into something deeper. Something that made him feel real in an industry known for artifice. After Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1989, the world met Keanu as Ted Logan, air guitar playing, time-traveling, and charmingly clueless. The film was a cultural oddity, a quirky blend of sci-fi and stoner comedy that should have faded into the VHS archives. But it didn't. Because behind Ted's woes and excellence, there was sincerity. Keanu didn't mock the character, he embodied him with genuine warmth. People didn't just laugh with Ted, they liked him. That likability proved to be Keanu's secret weapon. Just a few years later in Point Break, 1991, he flipped the script completely. Gone was the laid-back slacker. In his place stood Johnny Utah, an ex-quarterback turned FBI agent infiltrating a gang of surfing bank robbers. It sounds absurd on paper, but Keanu made it work, balancing adrenaline with vulnerability. There was still a softness to his eyes, even when chasing Patrick Swayze through crashing waves and skydives. Then came Speed in 1994. A bus, a bomb, and Keanu Reeves as Jack Traven, the cop who had to keep it moving. It was the ultimate 90s action setup, and yet again, Keanu broke typecasting. He wasn't overly macho, he wasn't cracking endless one-liners. He was calm, calculated, almost subdued. A hero who didn't need to shout to be heard. Audiences were hooked. By this point, Keanu could have stayed in that lane forever. Big action roles, explosions, sequels. But he didn't. Instead, he turned toward more introspective films. A Walk in the Clouds, Little Buddha, The Devil's Advocate. Some were hits, some weren't. But what tied them together was a thread of existential curiosity. Keanu was choosing characters that reflected inner conflict, not just external stakes. And then in 1999, everything changed. The Matrix wasn't just a film, it was a statement, a cinematic landmark that redefined what action could be, both visually and philosophically. Keanu's performance as Neo wasn't about delivering Oscar-bait monologues, it was about awakening. Neo's journey mirrored the one Keanu had quietly been on for years, searching for truth in a world that felt increasingly artificial. The role demanded more than acting, it demanded physical transformation. Keanu trained for months in martial arts, learning wire fu, kung fu, and choreography that pushed his body to the brink. He performed through injuries, including spinal surgery. And he never complained. He just worked. What made Neo iconic wasn't just his slow-motion backflips or bullet dodging. It was the weight in Keanu's eyes, the sense that this wasn't just a sci-fi fantasy but a metaphor for waking up to who you really are. The Matrix wasn't the peak of Keanu's career. It was the pivot, from cult favorite to global icon, from an actor playing characters to a man channeling universal truth. To the public, Keanu Reeves has always been a reserved figure, polite, soft-spoken, and at times almost ghost-like in how effortlessly he slips through the chaos of Hollywood. But behind the poise, there exists a quiet sorrow that has shaped nearly every part of his life. In the late 1990s, Keanu was in love. He met Jennifer Syme, a bright, talented woman who worked in the music industry and had close ties to artists like David Lynch. Their relationship grew quickly, and soon after, they were expecting a child, a baby girl they named Ava. But on December 24, 1999, just weeks before her due date, Ava was stillborn. The grief was immediate and immeasurable. The loss of a child is not something that time erases. It's something that time weaves into you. For Keanu and Jennifer, the pain became too much to carry together. They separated not long after, though they remained connected, bound by a tragedy that few could understand. Then, just as the wounds had barely begun to scar over, another blow. On April 2, 2001, Jennifer died in a car accident after leaving a party. She was only 28. Keanu, now just 36 years old, had lost both his daughter and the woman he loved in the space of 16 months. For most people, that kind of pain would lead to collapse. But Keanu didn't implode. He didn't lash out or retreat into destructive habits. Instead, he went quiet. He stepped back from the public eye. No dramatic statements, no interviews laced with tears, just absence and grief. What makes this part of Keanu's story so remarkable isn't just the tragedy itself, but how he carried it. With silence, with dignity, and eventually with acceptance. He once said in an interview, "Grief and loss, those are things that don't ever go away. They stay with you, but they also teach you things about love, about empathy, about who you are when everything falls apart." This wasn't a soundbite. It was a man speaking from lived experience. Keanu never used his suffering as currency. He never cashed it in for sympathy or attention. But you can see it in his eyes, in the stillness when others would be loud, in the gentleness when the world demands steel. What we witnessed on screen, in Neo's confusion and John Wick's heartbreak, wasn't just acting. It was truth. A truth too personal to perform, too honest to fake. And maybe that's why his roles resonate so deeply. Because behind the choreographed fights and sci-fi spectacles is a man who knows what it's like to lose everything. Keanu Reeves doesn't just play emotionally complex characters, he embodies them. Unlike most action stars who rely on bravado and brute force, Keanu brings something different to the screen: vulnerability. There's always a flicker behind his eyes, grief, loss, restraint. You see it in how Neo hesitates before a fight, in how John Wick grieves more than he kills. Even in his silences, there's meaning. He doesn't yell. He absorbs. This emotional authenticity doesn't come from method acting or studio coaching. It comes from life. Keanu knows what it's like to suffer, to lose, to feel powerless. And rather than bury those experiences, he weaves them into his performances with haunting sincerity. That's why when John Wick mourns his dog or Neo questions his purpose, it doesn't feel like acting. It feels like confession. Behind the scenes, he's just as intentional. During John Wick Chapter 3, he personally trained for months with the stunt team, not just to master the choreography, but to respect the craft. He never treated stunt doubles as background props. He treated them like equals. One member of the team said Keanu would bow after each rehearsal. Bow. A gesture of gratitude, not performance. There's another story from the Matrix Reloaded set. After one long day of shooting, instead of heading to his trailer, Keanu sat on the floor with the crew, eating lunch from a paper plate. No entourage, no special treatment, just a guy who sees himself as part of a team, not above it. His empathy shows up in unexpected places too. One day, a fan waited outside a movie set for hours just to meet him. When she told him she skipped work to see him, he asked, "Do you need me to call your boss?" And he meant it. That fan still talks about it, not because he was famous, but because he made her feel seen. Even his silence is intentional. In an age where actors post every good deed online, Keanu avoids cameras, avoids credit, and lets his actions speak. He doesn't need to convince you he's humble. He just is. And maybe that's the most powerful part of it all. He's proof that you can be strong and soft. That masculinity doesn't require dominance. That pain can shape you without breaking you. That the most heroic thing a person can do isn't winning a fight, but choosing not to become cruel because they've been hurt. Keanu's generosity isn't limited to gestures. He runs a private foundation supporting children's hospitals and cancer research, but he doesn't attach his name to it. He rarely speaks about it. It exists to help, not to promote him. Why is he like this? Some point to his Buddhist leanings. Others say it's the result of his grief. But perhaps it's simpler than that. Keanu seems to understand something most of us forget. We're not guaranteed anything in this life. So when you have something, love, money, time, you give it away while you can. In interviews, he often avoids talking about his past, preferring to focus on the present moment. He reads Dostoevsky and Camus. He rides his motorcycle through the hills of LA just to feel free. He co-founded a custom motorcycle company, and he writes poetry, privately, rarely shared. He's not chasing legacy, he's chasing meaning. It would be easy to say Keanu Reeves is beloved because he's cool, because he's in awesome movies, because he looks good holding a gun in slow motion. But none of that explains the way people feel about him. He represents something increasingly rare in the modern world: empathy without agenda. He reminds us that it's okay to hurt, that you can survive unimaginable pain and still choose to be kind. That you don't need to post every good deed online for it to count. That real strength isn't about muscle or dominance, it's about resilience and compassion and choosing peace when you've earned the right to be angry. As he enters his 60s, Keanu Reeves has nothing left to prove, and yet he continues to challenge himself, not for fame, but for personal growth, to get better, to do better, to be better. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real reason we love him. Not because he's Neo or John Wick, but because he's Keanu. If this story moved you, or gave you a new perspective on a man who's often misunderstood, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe for more powerful stories about the people behind the screen. And if you want to explore more stories like this, thanks for watching. Be kind, always.